SUVs and crossovers have become the default family vehicle of choice globally. But let's be honest, there's literally millions of them that it's so hard to stand out. Then again, Mazda isn't like everyone else. In the pursuit of making an SUV that puts driving pleasure at the forefront, they created a new range of premium inline-six powered SUVs. And one of those SUVs is this new Mazda CX-60. So with all of this talk in terms of Mazda being a premium brand now, let's talk about first yung design. If it evokes that premium feel, honestly, I do think it's one of the best looking SUVs Mazda's ever made. It looks really well proportioned, the long hood, the short rear deck, the rising belt line here with the chrome detailing, and as with Mazda's evolved Kodo design language, basically you have this lack of character line sa kanyang sides ng kanyang katawan. You have an inline-six badge sa kanyang fenders, which are actually fake vents, by the way. And then moving down here, you're gonna see yung kanyang 20-inch wheels, which this is, by the way, the gas version. So you have more chrome detailing as opposed to the diesel versions, the sport trim rather, with its piano black or gunmetal finishes. So my opinion has changed. With the CX-60, I now prefer this gas version compared to the diesel version because I think the chrome details sort of really emphasize the car's executive and very classy status. But anyhow, moving towards the back of the CX-60, again, very Mazda in terms of the minimalism sa kanyang design. The LED taillights go almost to the middle of the car. Very clean look. Yun nga lang, I don't know why Mazda did this, but yung kanyang rear bumpers have fake exhausts. Of all the things that Mazda is gonna be doing in their cleanly styled cars, they would actually add fake exhausts. I don't know why they did that. I don't know what's in the designer's mind when they were making the rear end of the CX-60. Pero yeah, it's here. There's the fake exhausts. But yeah, overall, it's still a nice looking SUV. It's actually really trying to elevate the status quo of Mazda in terms of design, in terms of the way the car looks. And it really does project an image of prestige and luxury with how this CX-60 looks. And yun nga, for me, this is one of the best looking Mazda crossover SUVs, or basically like any other SUV sa price point niya. But anyhow, I think it's a good time for us to move inside the CX-60 to see how this SUV feels like in terms of the luxury feels ng interior. So now that we are here inside the new CX-60, and as you're gonna see, the interior is really premium, it's really luxurious, and there's plenty of Napa leather surfaces here in this gas version. The diesel, by the way, gets a lot of suede sa dash and doors niya, along with the caramel-like color sa kanyang interior and the steering wheel, which, though it looks good, I somehow prefer the potential durability of having this Napa leather interior as opposed to the diesel one with the whole lot of suede surfaces sa kanyang dash and doors. And then, as for the other parts of the interiors, plenty of silver surfaces here in this gas version. Wala kang piano black. That's what I love about this interior. Wala kang piano black on the high-touch surfaces. And then, as with every Mazda, there's a lot of physical controls here sa kanyang climate controls and even the cooled seats. Yes, this, by the way, is cooled front seats. You also have your rotary knob controller for the Mazda Connect infotainment system. So, as usual, this is controlled via the rotary knob controller only. Or, if you're using the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, you can use it by the touchscreen, but only when the car is stationary nga lang. To be honest though, I know there will be people who won't agree with me, but personally, I prefer infotainment systems that are based on the rotary knob controller because it's just so user-friendly to use, at least for me, especially if you've owned the car long-term, and it's really less distracting. So imagine you're driving and because of muscle memory, you kinda know where to point the cursor or at least the highlight of the scroll wheel. Then of course, you have a Bose surround sound system which sounds really good here in the CX-60, one of the best implementations of the Bose sound system. And by the way, in terms of features, it's pretty much the same lang din with the diesel. There's really not much in it in terms of their features, so both are fully loaded with luxury features. And the driving position, as with Mazda's palagi, it's spot on, it's really good. Though the driver personalization system, I'll be honest, sabi ko nga sa aking preview video of this car, it's hit and miss. Yung parang the car will suggest a driving position that's ideal supposedly for your height, pero yeah, once adjusted for, it's one of the nicest driving positions palagi in the segment, yung mga Mazda interiors natin. Would I call it a BMW rivaling interior though? To be honest, no. Because from the door thud pa lang, yes, it's solid but not tank vault or tank-like na para sa mga German cars. And when you go down here sa lower parts of the interior, meron kang mga hard plastics which you wouldn't find in the BMW X3's interior. But compared to the Honda CR-V, the Toyota RAV4, and other crossover SUVs at its price point, it's really a step above those mainstream crossover SUVs. So yeah, I think it's a good time for us to talk about the rear seats naman of the Mazda CX-60. So now that we're here at the back of the Mazda CX-60, and as you're gonna see, in terms of space, as usual with Mazdas, they're not really the best in terms of the outright legroom and headroom. Especially considering that this is a mid-size already in the mid-size classification of the crossover SUV segment, you expect a lot of interior space. Pero to be honest, I'm perfectly fine. Ito yung legroom ko. This is not a lot, especially compared to a Honda CR-V, which is a class lower in terms of sizing. This is not a lot, but I do still perfectly fit, so I'm okay with it, to be honest. Headroom is also, actually, headroom's better. Headroom is this much for me for my 5'11" height. But I do love the comfort of the seats though. I love how the rear seats are sculpted for long distance support. Again, not the best in terms of outright space, but comfort-wise, it's really top-notch. And then, 2 USB-C ports here at the back. You also have a panoramic sunroof, a first for Mazda, and your usual center console or center armrest with 2 cup holders. Nothing really stands out here in the back in terms of amenities. It's, it's still pretty much on par with basically every other crossover SUV at its price point and segment. So yeah, I think it's a good time na ngayon to talk about the rest of the car's practicality aspects and basically talk about the trunk space of the Mazda CX-60.
As for cargo space, the Mazda CX-60 offers 570 liters behind the second row, which is actually pretty good for its segment. Though yun nga lang, compared to the Honda CR-V Hybrid, that offers a class-leading 589 liters. Now, if we fold down the second row seats, space increases to almost 1200 liters. Now as for engines,
so now that this is a premium car with a rear-wheel drive architecture that's really aiming for premium aspirations, it also needs, of course, an engine to match. So under the hood of the CX-60 is a pair of inline-6 3.3-liter engines. So in this case of this variant, it's the 3.3-liter gas version, while the sport version gets a 3.3-liter inline-6 diesel. It's also worth noting that this is a 48-volt mild hybrid. Not a hybrid, a full hybrid, but a mild hybrid because of its 48-volt architecture. Though the electric motors can sort of power the car for a few seconds while coasting, but it's really not a hybrid. Anyhow, with all of this 48-volt inline-6 talk with this engine, I think it's a good time now for us to get inside and actually take this car for a drive. So, the Mazda CX-60, one of the most highly anticipated car reviews probably in my channel for this year. How does this now premium SUV feel like on the open road, and whether Mazda is able to meet its lofty promises with this CX-60? So, first and foremost, in terms of handling, let's first talk about the handling. The CX-60 handles like a finely tuned crossover SUV. And that's really thanks to the rear-wheel drive architecture. That, okay, so this is all-wheel drive, pero it's a rear-biased all-wheel drive yung kanang system. But yun nga, it's basically like the BMW X3, no? So the X-Drive ng X3 is really predominantly all-wheel drive, which just sends power to the front wheels lang if it's needed in order to have better traction. But for the most part, this is rear-wheel drive, accelerating and all that stuff. The car feels planted since the weight shifts towards the back, and therefore you're able to exit out of a corner really well. The steering is actually surprisingly heavy for electric power steering, and I like Mazda for that. And at the same time, it feels direct. Yun nga lang, as I've said in my recent Mazda reviews nga, the steering ratio and therefore kanyang front end feels less sprightly. What I mean by that is, the steering is more on the slower ratio nowadays, even compared pa nga to Honda with the CR-V. And combined with the heavy feel ng kanyang steering, the car feels less agile, I think, in terms of how the front end bites onto the road. Pero the result is the car feels more direct through the corners. It feels more like what the driver intends to do. So basically, parang sa CX-30 and the Mazda 3, the new generation Mazdas, yung kanyang steering reactions are more on the part na you don't do a lot of steering corrections at the expense of agility nga lang. A different kind of interpretation of what Mazda thinks now as fun to drive in their cars. And though in terms of steering feel, there's not a lot as usual with electric power steerings, but this is pretty good in terms of steering feel. It's not completely numb. You're really able to tell how to point the car on the road, which makes it confidence-inspiring. And that suspension, yung kanang double wishbone front suspension and rear multi-link, it's a very luxury car suspension geometry sa totoo lang. It really does well with body control whenever you go through corners. So, and that 8-speed automatic is really well tuned once you're on the move. Ang ganda nung pakiramdam ng 8-speed automatic niya. It shifts smoothly and responsively like a ZF 8-speed. And that inline 6, as you're gonna hear, I'm gonna do a couple of downshifts. That sounds really good. There's really nothing like an inline 6 in terms of engine sound. So I'm gonna brake, down. It rev matches. I love that. And yun nga, whenever you're exiting through corners, woohoo! This car feels really good in the bends. The brakes are also very solid in terms of feel. Typical Mazda na ang firm ng brake feel niya. It's really good. It's really good on a dynamics perspective. The car is really fun to drive. And yeah, compared to everything else in this segment, this feels more emotionally rich in terms of the driving experience. It's more character, especially with the inline 6. It's really what an SUV that Mazda could only make, no, at this price point. So of course, being a luxury car, you're probably concerned on how this car performs at low speeds. Let's be honest, most of the time, we're going to be driving this car fast. You're going to be driving this car in city traffic. And that 8-speed automatic, by the way, is interesting to talk about because it's not an 8-speed automatic with a torque converter. It uses a multi-plate clutch. And Mazda says that they've done this so that they can precisely control how the transition between the engine and the electric motor. So we're going to be coming to a full stop here. So there, as you've seen naman kanina, the 48-volt mild hybrid while we're on our twisty road driving, it's really aggressively cutting the engine. Though not aggressive in a sense na ang jarring ng kanyang pag-turn off ng engine. It's more of the part na whenever possible, it's really gonna try its best to turn the engine off. Of course, in order to save fuel. Actually, sa totoo lang, that multi-plate clutch is not as rough or as jerky as the initial reviews have suggested. It's a lot smoother now, I think, when I got this car na. Not sure if it's because of a software update or whether this car's already been broken in or whether this 8-speed automatic is a better match to the inline 6 gasoline. I'm not sure. So, totoo lang, or probably all three apply. Pero you know what, yun nga, Mazda's been doing incremental upgrades or updates rather to the software of the multi-plate clutch 8-speed. And I think that's what they've done here. May jerkiness pa rin, but not as bad as what the initial reviews have said. And they're few and far in between. Most especially, it happens kapag, yun nga, because the engine cuts off nga. It's more of in those moments when you're indecisive sa throttle niya. But for the most part, I think it's been smoothened out here in my application with the CX-60. So, apart from that, being a mild hybrid, yung kanyang engine start-stop is very smooth. I've never really turned the system off for the entire time this car is with me. So I'm expecting good fuel economy numbers with this 3.3-liter inline 6. And in fact, I'm currently doing 11.3 kilometers per liter, which is really impressive for a car with this big of an engine. The diesel is gonna be expectedly better and torqueier, of course. Pero sa totoo lang, here, even in city speeds, don't really need to mash the throttle a lot because the engine's so big in the first place, so it's not dependent on the boost ng turbos in order to move. Yun nga lang though, on the downside, because of its sport yanding, yung kanyang ride is on the firm side. a BMW is also firm, but I find the CX-60 to be more unsettled compared to the BMWs with firm suspension. And more so compared to cars like the new Honda CR-V, the Hyundai Tucson, they're really more comfortable for me on a ride perspective. The ride of those two crossovers feel more settled. More so the Lexus NX that this is also trying to compete with sort of na rin because it's now a premium SUV. So I guess that's one part where Mazda needs to improve on then, the ride aspect of the CX-60. It's not fortune or bad in terms of ride quality, but yun nga, not quite what you would expect in a premium car. So out here on the highway, and things get a lot smoother for the CX-60. So yung kanyang firm ride kanina at lower speeds pays dividends on the highway because the ride becomes more settled, there's less rocking motion. So as a result, there's better body control the faster that you go in the CX-60. And then, this is also where you're gonna notice the refinement levels of the CX-60 because there's really not a lot of road and wind noise entering to the cabin. This car is really quiet at high speeds. It's almost as good actually as, let's say, a BMW X3 in that regard. And I think it's really indeed a notch above in terms of the refinement and road and wind noise aspect compared to the likes of the Toyota RAV4, the Honda CR-V. And though the Hyundai Tucson sort of closely matches this, because if you're gonna remember my review of the Tucson, I was so impressed with the refinement and rigidity levels of that car. As with luxury cars, like yung mga BMWs that I love, yung mga ating mga Audis, mga Mercedes-Benz, lagi kong kino-commend din ko nilang chassis rigidity and the bank vault feeling that German cars tend to have. Here in the CX-60, yun nga, it is refined, but it is not yet at the bank vault levels ng mga German cars. So, yes, the chassis is inherently solid naman, maganda yung rigidity ng katawan niya, but I do find that there's more vibrations compared pa rin to the German cars, especially on the top part ng kanyang katawan where the panoramic sunroof is. And with that, at least in terms of the rigidity and the refinement aspect, yun nga, it's sort of in between the mainstream cars and the true luxury cars. Like yung mga ating BMW nga and mga ating mga Mercedes and mga Audi. And then of course at these speeds, sabi ko yung kanyang 8-speed automatic is very smooth, very refined, and it's really responsive. So when I put my foot down, maganda yung shifts na. It's very responsive, very eager. ZF 8-speed like na nga actually in terms of smoothness and responsiveness. And yun nga at higher speeds, like ito nga sa highway, that engine cutoff is very smooth and you can pag-restart then. It's really just like a hybrid, pero yun nga, because it's a mild hybrid, it can really power the car in pure electric mode for long distances. In fairness naman to Mazda, yung kanyang 48-volt mild hybrid does really coast for like around 40 seconds at most without the engine. So it's really good, I guess, on that part for a mild hybrid. And then of course, also worth talking about is ng mga suite of advanced driver assistance systems branded as iActive Sense in the case of Mazda. So you have the full suite, the automatic emergency braking, the adaptive cruise control, which doesn't work though in stop and go traffic. It deactivates at 30 kilometers per hour, activates at 40 kph if I'm not mistaken. You also have lane departure warning, lane keeping assist, no lane centering though for the CX-60, along with blind spot warning and front and rear cross traffic alert. So I like that part na meron kang front cross traffic alert, which is really useful sa mga blind junctions. In my opinion though, is it already a true BMW competitor? Not quite, but it's sort of something that you should treat as an in-between car from the mainstream and the true luxury cars. Even compared to the X1, mas rigid pa rin yung katawan ng X1 compared dito. But yun nga, compared to the RAV4s, the CR-Vs, and even Mazda's own CX-5, this feels more premium, more refined, more luxury car talaga in terms of how it drives, especially at high speeds, no?
The Mazda CX-60 starts at a little under 2.8 million pesos, while the Sport Diesel version costs 100,000 more. Additionally, since the electric motor for the 48-volt mild hybrid system somewhat powers the car, albeit mostly in coasting, it was able to meet the DOE's requirements in order to be a hybrid electric vehicle. Therefore, This car comes with coding exemption, along with cheaper car registration. Now, the Mazda CX-60 does indeed stand out. So much so that in order to be a sporty SUV, the brand had to make a few concessions including its low-speed ride quality. The question now is, how far are you willing to sacrifice ride quality just for you to have the best driving and sportiest SUV in its segment? Therefore, this makes the Mazda CX-60 more of an emotional rather than a pragmatic choice. And if that's what you're looking for in a crossover SUV, then you'll certainly love this beautifully crafted Mazda.